It was a company dinner. My wife's assistant, Qin Chen, had his arm wrapped around her waist in full view of everyone, showing her off table by table like a trophy. I took a photo and sent it to the family group chat. 10 minutes later, my father-in-law stormed into the hotel with his men, slapped her to the ground, and snarled, "Do you even know who you've pissed off?" My wife was stunned. It had started an hour earlier. Qin Chen kept his arm locked around Su Wanqing's waist as they made their way around the banquet hall, clinking glasses, toasting table after table, the whole room buzzing with laughter and applause. He held his hand steady on her hip the entire time, like he wanted to make sure no one missed it. I sat at the edge of the head table, took out my phone, and quietly snapped a picture. Su Wanqing wore a silver-white gown, her shoulder brushing lightly against his chest. At one point he leaned in to shield her drink from spilling, a smugness creeping into his expression that he didn't bother hiding. Someone at a nearby table laughed and called out, "Assistant Qin, you don't even look like an assistant anymore. More like one of the Su family." Qin Chen didn't deny it. He just raised his glass with a smile. "Don't talk nonsense. I just understand President Su better than most people do." Then he glanced over at me. A glance so light it was like flicking a used cup off the edge of a table. Su Wanqing didn't push him away. She only turned to the room with a mild frown. "It's a company dinner. Let's keep it fun. No need to take the jokes too far." It sounded like a scolding, but to me it landed like quiet permission, since she never told him to let go, and she never once looked my way. Qin Chen kept his arm around her as they moved to the next table, and the next. At each one he rattled off project details and collaboration numbers that were my work from my desk, as easily as if he'd built them himself. The finance manager joked, half serious, "Assistant Qin's really been climbing lately. Should we start calling you President Qin soon?" Qin Chen waved it off with mock modesty. "President Su trusts me, so I can't let her down. As for people who just take up a seat without doing the work, well, it's about time they made room." The hall went quiet for a beat. Eyes drifted toward me. I didn't say anything. I just pulled up the photo I'd taken and sent it to the family group, 6 people in it. My father-in-law Su Jincheng, my mother-in-law Su's second uncle, Su Wanqing, her cousin, and me. Under the photo, I typed one more line. "Dad, you said tonight I should wait until when?" The chat went silent for 3 seconds. Then a voice message came in from my father-in-law. I didn't open it. He called instead. I picked up and said only, "I'm at the Yunting Hotel, 3rd floor banquet hall." A 2-second pause on his end. Then, 10 minutes. I hung up. By then Qin Chen had steered Su Wanqing over to my table. He saw me set my phone down and his smile widened. "Brother Shen, why sit here all alone? Everyone's enjoying themselves, no need to be so stiff. President Su's been under a lot of pressure lately. I'm just taking a few toasts off her hands. You don't mind, do you?" He called me brother, but his hand never left my wife's waist. Su Wanqing finally looked at me. Not with guilt, just irritation. "Xin Yan, Qin Chen's helping me with the socializing tonight. Don't make a scene." I looked back at her. 3 years married, and she rarely called me husband in front of anyone. At the office it was Vice President Shen. Outside it was just Shen Yan. The only time her voice ever softened into something warmer was late at night on the phone, when she needed me to fix a contract or bail her out of a crisis. "Honey, help me out just this once." I set my glass down. "Am I making a scene?" Qin Chen let out a soft laugh. "Good. I was worried you'd get the wrong idea. President Su trusts me the most these days. I know that might be hard to accept right away." A few executives nearby traded glances. Some sipped their tea and said nothing. Others pretended not to have heard at all. Su Wanqing's expression darkened. "Qin Chen, watch your words." He immediately dropped into an apologetic tone. "Sorry, President Su. I just feel bad for you. You're working yourself to the bone for this company, and some people just sit back and wait for you to cater to their feelings." That landed harder than anything he'd said before. But Su Wanqing didn't argue. She just looked at me, as if waiting for me to take the hint and back down. I nodded slowly. "Are you done?" Qin Chen froze for half a second. I stood up and grabbed my jacket off the chair. If you're done, take your hand off her. The hall went dead silent. The smile on Qin Chen's face stiffened. Then he leaned in a little closer to her, as if for backup. Brother Shin, everyone's watching. Let's not embarrass President Su. Su Wanqing lowered her voice too. Shin Yen, it's a celebration tonight. Qin Chen just landed the East City project. Don't cause a scene. The East City project. When those 4 words hit me, I actually smiled. I had built the underlying model for that project myself. I'd brought in the client. I'd revised the final risk clause until 4 in the morning. Qin Chen had simply taken the documents I prepared and read them aloud in a meeting, and somehow it had become his project. I didn't bother explaining. Some things weren't mine to say out loud. That's when the banquet hall doors were shoved open from outside, hard enough that the panel cracked against the wall. Everyone turned at once. My father-in-law, Su Wanqing, walked in with 4 bodyguards and the company's legal director trailing behind him. He was 57, always composed, the kind of man who never even raised his voice in a boardroom fight. But tonight his face was ash-gray. Su Wanqing froze the second she saw him. Dad, why are you here? He didn't answer. His eyes went straight to Qin Chen's hand, still resting on her waist. Qin Chen yanked it back like he'd touched fire, but it was already too late. Su Wanqing crossed the room in a few strides and slapped her. The sound cracked through the hall. Su Wanqing stumbled sideways, catching herself on the table edge as a wine glass toppled and red wine bled across the white cloth. Nobody dared say a word. She pressed a hand to her cheek, eyes wide with shock. Dad, you hit me? He pointed at her, his voice shaking with barely restrained fury. Do you have any idea who you've just pissed off? The color drained out of Qin Chen's face the second those words landed. Su Wanqing froze too, and instinctively looked toward me. I stood under the light, jacket still draped over my arm, saying nothing. Su Wanqing turned to me, and his whole tone shifted. Yen, what happened tonight? The Su family owes you an apology. Somewhere in the hall, a pair of chopsticks clattered to the floor. Qin Chen's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He was only just beginning to realize that the man he'd been humiliating all night, showing off in front of, might not be the pushover he'd assumed. I looked at Su Wanqing. The confusion on her face cut deeper than the slap had. She still didn't understand. This was never about my temper. It was that she'd severed her own family's lifeline with her own hands. As her father pulled her away, she kept glancing back at me. It wasn't regret in her eyes. It was disbelief. She couldn't understand why her father would strike her in public for my sake, and even less how a husband she'd felt entitled to neglect, to ignore, to let be humiliated in front of a room full of people, had somehow become someone Su Wanqing considered untouchable. Qin Chen recovered first. He hurried after them, voice trembling. Chairman Su, tonight I overstepped. Please don't blame President Su. I was only trying to take some of the toasts off her hands. Su Wanqing stopped walking. Shut up. Qin Chen froze mid-step. Su Wanqing turned on him, eyes cold as knives. Who do you think you are, speaking on her behalf? Qin Chen's lips twitched, but nothing came out. The man who'd been strutting from table to table an hour ago now looked like his spine had been pulled straight out of him. Su Wanqing snapped back to herself and stepped in front of him. Dad, he's just an employee. There's no need to take it out on him. Her father let out a short, furious laugh. Just an employee? An employee who puts his arm around you while toasting the whole room? An employee who dares to take digs at Yen in front of everyone? An employee who claims the East City project as his achievement? Su Wanqing's expression faltered. She glanced instinctively at Qin Chen. He lowered his head fast. President Su, I didn't mean it like that. Whether you meant it or not doesn't matter, I said. Every head in the room turned toward me. Here's the continuation in the same natural tone. I slid my phone back into my pocket, my voice level. What matters is that President Su thought it was fine. Su Wanqing's brow creased. Shin Yen, do you really have to talk like this right now? I nodded. Yes. That single word seemed to knock the wind out of her. In 3 years, I'd rarely spoken to her like that. Not even when she'd canceled our anniversary dinner last minute to entertain clients. Not even when she moved Qin Chen into the lounge next to her office. Not even when she kept crediting my work to him over and over. I'd never embarrassed her in front of people. She'd gotten used to it to the point of assuming I'd always back down. She took a breath, lowering her voice. Qin Chen was out of line tonight. I'll admit that. But with half the company watching, you let Dad make a scene like this. How am I supposed to manage my team after this? I looked at her. When he had his arm around your waist, toasting table to table, did you once think about how I'd have to face this company afterward? Something flickered in her eyes. Qin Chen jumped in before she could answer. Brother Shin, it's really not what you think. President Su and I are completely innocent. Strictly professional. If it makes you uncomfortable, I'll keep my distance from now on. I didn't even look at him. What you need to keep isn't your distance. It's your place. His face went pale. Su Wanqing's patience finally snapped. Xin Yan, that's enough. She pressed a hand over her face, eyes reddening. Whether from anger or humiliation, I couldn't tell. I'll deal with tonight, but don't blow this out of proportion. Qin Chen has genuinely helped me. The East City project, the North Bay financing, the South Zone coordination, he's had a hand in all of it. You don't get to erase that just because you're having feelings about it. My father-in-law's expression darkened further at that. I just smiled. Fine. She froze at the sound of it. Since he's been so helpful, I said, starting tomorrow, I'll step back from the East City project. I'll stop handling the North Bay financing. I'll stop coordinating the South Zone supply chain. Let Assistant Qin take it from here. Her brow knit instantly. What do you mean? Exactly what I said. I handed the tablet I always carried to the legal director standing beside me. From tonight on, I'll only do what's actually in my job description. Every system, every guarantee, every client relationship I've been maintaining personally, unpaid, that stops now. For the first time, real panic crossed her face. Shun Yen. The company isn't a stage for you to throw a tantrum on. I looked at her. I'm not throwing a tantrum. I paused. I'm handing things over. Those two words landed like a weight. Her hand, halfway to the tablet, froze in midair. Qin Chen saw his opening. Brother Shin, isn't this a little irresponsible? Miss Su just got slapped in front of everyone, and now you're using the company to threaten her? With one sentence, he'd repositioned himself as her protector. And sure enough, she turned back to me, her eyes cold again. Xin Yan, if you're upset, we can talk about it at home. Don't drag the company's interests into this. I didn't bother explaining further. She still thought the company's interests and I were two separate things that had just accidentally collided. She had no idea that every stable step Su Corporation had taken over the last 3 years had my name quietly holding it up underneath. My father-in-law finally spoke, low and tired. Yen, go home for now. I'll handle the rest. I nodded and turned to go. Behind me, Qin Chen called out, Brother Shen, I'll head to the tech department tomorrow to sort out the permission handover. Don't worry, I'll keep the project steady for Miss Su. I stopped mid-step. Fine. He clearly hadn't expected me to agree that easily. I turned back and looked at him. As long as you can actually handle it. The next morning at 9, Qin Chen showed up at the tech center just as promised, holding the permission transfer form signed by Su Wanqing. His tone was firm. Starting today, I'm taking over the Qingyao system project. Vice President Shin has already agreed to the handover. The system manager scanned the form, his expression strange. Assistant Qin, we can't transfer this permission. Qin Chen frowned. Miss Su signed it herself. The manager turned the screen toward him. Even her signature won't do it. Qin Chen's face darkened. What are you talking about? The manager pointed to the field marked highest permission owner. 2 words sat there, Shin Yan. And the account type wasn't listed as an employee. It was listed as the original authorizer. Qin Chen stared at the screen, his eyes shifting back and forth in disbelief. At almost the same moment, an automatic alert landed in my inbox. Qin Yao system. Highest permission transfer request failed. I read it, then shut my laptop. On my desk, the resignation handover was already 3 pages deep. I knew this was only the first setback. The real counterattack was still coming. Qin Chen didn't back off. At 2 that afternoon, he brought Su Wanqing to the tech center in person. The moment she walked in, every tech staffer in the room stood up. She spotted me sitting in the corner, quietly organizing documents, and her expression darkened instantly. Xin Yan, do you really have to make this ugly? I looked up. Make what ugly? The permissions. She slapped the application form down on my desk. The Qin Yao system is what Su Group runs on. Qin Chen's leading the East City project now. He needs the highest level access. Are you blocking this on purpose to sabotage the project? I picked up the form and glanced through it. Her signature was there, along with a space for Qin Chen's sign-off. But there was no authorization from me. I set it back down. This isn't Su Group's property. Her brow twitched. Excuse me? The tech center went so quiet you could hear the air conditioner humming. I pulled up the licensing agreement from 3 years ago on my screen. The Qin Yao system's source code, the core algorithms, the underlying risk control modules, they're under my personal ownership. Su Group has usage rights, not disposal rights. Transferring top-level permission requires my written consent. Qin Chen jumped in. Brother Shin, isn't that a stretch? The system runs the whole company, and you draw a salary here. How can you call it personal property? I looked at him. Your salary buys my labor, not my intellectual property. His face went rigid. Su Wanqing stared at the screen, and for the first time, something like doubt crossed her face. She wasn't ignorant about contracts. She just never actually read this one closely. Because 3 years ago, when she first took over as CEO, Su Corporation had been barely holding on. Her father was bedridden. Banks were calling in loans. Suppliers were demanding payment. The system kept crashing. Overseas investors had pulled their funding. That was when I stepped in, rebuilt the risk control and supply chain models from scratch with the Qin Yao system. I never asked for equity. I never made a show of it. I just signed a quiet licensing agreement and got to work. She'd told me back then, Shen Yan, once the company stabilizes, I'll make it up to you. The company stabilized. She forgot. She was silent for a moment. So what do you want now? Follow the contract. I flipped the agreement open to page 3. Su Group can keep using the basic functions. But top-level project authority, the financing risk control interface, and the exclusive South Continent supply chain module, those all need separate authorization from me. I've been maintaining them for free for 3 years. That free service ends today. Qin Chen sneered. So in the end, you're just using the company to force President Su to bow to you. I didn't bother looking at him. She looked at me instead. Do you really have to do this? It's not about have to, I said. It's already done. Her chest rose and fell once. Xin Yan. Last night was just a misunderstanding. I finally raised my eyes to meet hers. A misunderstanding? I pulled out my phone and set last night's photo on the table between us. Him with his arm around your waist, toasting table to table. Misunderstanding. Someone joking he looks like Su family. Misunderstanding. Him saying I'm just dead weight. Misunderstanding. You telling me not to make a scene. Still a misunderstanding? With every word, her face grew darker. Qin Chen cut in fast. Brother Shin, don't twist it. We were all drinking. It was just the mood of the night. You weren't drunk. I stared at him. Every word you said, you made sure I could hear it. Every move, you picked the most crowded table to do it at. That wasn't the mood. You just didn't think I'd flip the table. His mouth twitched. Too bad you guessed wrong. I said. I'm not flipping the table. I closed my laptop. I'm pulling it out from under you. The tech lead ducked his head and coughed, not daring to say a word. Then Su Wanqing's phone rang. She glanced at the screen and picked up. It was the finance director, his voice tight enough that even people standing nearby could make it out. President Su, the risk assessment interface for the North Bay financing just went down. The bank's demanding we resubmit everything by 5 p.m. or this week's loan disbursement gets delayed. Su Wanqing's head snapped toward me. I stayed calm. The North Bay financing interface is part of the Qin premium module. Her grip on the phone tightened. You shut it down. Not shut down. I corrected her. The free license expired. Qin Chen jumped in immediately. President Su, don't worry. I'll have the tech team rebuild it. The tech lead's face went pale. Assistant Qin, that's not something we can rebuild in a day or two. Qin Chen shot him a look. Then work overtime. The tech lead couldn't help glancing at me. A look caught somewhere between reluctance and a silent plea for help. I kept my head down, quietly sorting through the last of the documents. For 3 years, calls like this used to come to me in the middle of the night. The finance interface crashes, call me. Supply chain data goes wrong, call me. Overseas funds need a sudden audit, call me. All Su Wanqing ever had to do was stand in the spotlight afterward and say, "Great work, everyone." Anyone who'd patched a hole at 3 a.m. quietly became her team. Not anymore. I was done patching. She hung up. Her voice softened, just slightly. Xin Yan, the North Bay financing really matters. I nodded. I know. Then turn the interface back on. Please. I can. Just as a flicker of relief crossed her face, I slid a quote across the table. Per the contract, emergency service fee, $3 million. Project-level interface maintenance billed separately. Qin Chen blurted out, "Are you out of your mind?" I looked at her. President Su. Business is business. The color drained from her face. That was the moment she finally understood. I wasn't arguing with her as a husband anymore. I was billing Su Corporation formally as its licensor. And she realized, for the first time, that Qin Chen's so-called takeover hadn't even gotten past the front door. The North Bay news didn't stay quiet for long. By 10 the next morning, the finance department had already run to the CEO's office 3 separate times. By 11, the bank's own risk manager called personally, demanding a full explanation of the model and the original logs. Qin Chen sat in the meeting room holding one of my old templates, and made it less than 5 minutes before someone cut him off. "Mr. Qin, this is just results. We need to know how the underlying weights are set, how supplier risk is calculated, why abnormal orders get flagged as level 3 warnings." Qin Chen flipped to the next page. It was blank. The core algorithm had never been in the project files to begin with. I was the only one who'd ever had it. Su Wanqing sat at the head of the table, her expression darkening by the second. "Qin Chen, didn't you say you were familiar with this part?" Sweat beaded on his forehead as he forced a smile. "President Su, I know the execution side. The technical details were always Vice President Shen's department." The bank manager said flatly, "If Mr. Shen isn't involved, we'll need to reassess Su Corporation's risk control capabilities altogether." The words hung in the air. Nobody in the room said anything. Su Wanqing turned to me. I sat at the far end of the table, no laptop in front of me. Just a notebook. "Xin Yan, explain it." I looked up. "I'm just sitting in today." Her jaw tightened. "I'm telling you to explain, President Su." My voice stayed even. "Explaining the model falls under Qingyao's paid services. Su Corporation hasn't purchased that service." Qin Chen slammed his hand on the table. "Shun Yan, this is a company crisis and you're still haggling over money?" I looked at him. "Aren't you the one running things now?" That shut him up fast. Su Wanqing's face went rigid too. The bank manager started packing up his papers. "President Su, let's end the meeting here for today. Once your company confirms who's actually authorized, we can talk again." The moment he left, Su Wanqing finally exploded. "Xin Yan, what exactly do you want? Stop being petty about unauthorized services. You're my husband." "Last night at the banquet," I said. "You didn't seem to remember that." She had nothing to say to that. Qin Chen cut back in. "President Su, he's doing this on purpose. He knows the company can't run without the system, so he's using it as leverage against you. Someone like him is a liability to keep around." I closed my notebook. Then fire me. The room went silent all over again. Here's the continuation in the same tone. A flicker of satisfaction crossed Qin Chen's eyes before he managed to smother it. Su Wanqing, though, didn't answer right away. She knew that if I actually walked, things would get complicated fast. But she wasn't about to back down in front of him either, so all she managed, coldly, was, "Don't think I wouldn't dare." I nodded. "I'll wait for the notice." I stood up and walked out of the meeting room. By afternoon, the supply chain hit another wall. The long-term framework agreement Nanjao Group had been about to sign was suddenly put on hold. Their contact replied with a single line. "Without Mr. Shin present, we can't confirm Su Corporation still has the capacity to fulfill its obligations." When Su Wanqing read that email, she smashed her cup on the desk. Qin Chen stood beside her, his face dark. "President Su, Nanjao doesn't respect you at all. You're the one running this company. Why do they only recognize Shin Yan?" Su Wanqing said nothing. She wanted to ask herself the same question. At 7 that evening, she called me, for the first time on her own initiative. I was at home tidying up the study. It was a villa her mother had arranged for us after the wedding, but there was almost nothing in it that actually belonged to me. A few books, a laptop, some contracts, a wedding ring. The phone rang 3 times before I picked up. Her voice came through in that familiar commanding tone. "Come back. We need to talk." "I'm home." A pause. "Come to the company. Work hours are over." There was a time she never had to think twice about whether I was off the clock. She'd call at 2 in the morning, mid-business trip or not, and I'd already be drafting a plan before sunrise. She went quiet for a moment, then lowered her voice. "Shin Yan, the company's in serious trouble right now." "I know." "Then why won't you come?" I set the last book into the box. "President Su, for serious situations, please go through the official process." The line went silent, then her voice turned cold. "Are you trying to force my hand?" I looked at the ring sitting on the table. It was plain, when we married, she'd said a quiet wedding shouldn't be flashy, so we kept it simple. I hadn't minded at the time. Now I understood. The things you keep simple at the start have a way of staying that simple forever. "Su Wanqing," I said, "I'm not forcing anything. I'm just done cleaning up after you." She hung up. Half an hour later, a legal notice arrived from the company. The language was harsh, accusing me of negligence, of refusing to hand over work, of stalling major projects, and demanding I transfer every permission to Qin Chen within 24 hours. It was signed by Su Group's legal department. Su Wanqing was CC'd. I read it once, then forwarded it to my father-in-law. He replied with 5 words, "Proceed with your plan." I opened my laptop and dropped 3 files into a single encrypted folder. The Qingyao Systems licensing agreement, the termination notice for the overseas guarantee, and the audit trail documenting Qin Chen's misconduct. I named the folder something simple: liquidation. The next morning, Su Wanqing called an emergency executive meeting. By the time I arrived, the conference room was already full. Qin Chen sat to her right, the seat that used to be mine. A laptop sat open in front of him, and a thick stack of printouts beside it. When he saw me walk in, he looked up with a deliberate smile. Deputy Shin finally decided to show up. I didn't respond. Su Wanqing looked at me, exhaustion written across her face from what was clearly a sleepless night, but her voice stayed hard. "Sit down." I took the seat at the far end of the table. Qin Chen switched on the projector. A summary appeared on the screen: North Bay financing delayed, Nanjao contract suspended, financial interface anomalies, missing data from the Qingdong project. The final line listed a name under responsible party: Shin Yan. He rose to his feet, his voice thick with gravity. "Everyone, over the past few days, this company has faced a series of failures. On the surface, it looks like a handover issue, but the real cause is Deputy Shin's refusal to cooperate with the transition." He clicked to the next slide. "These are the email records I compiled last night. They show I repeatedly requested permission transfers from him, and he stalled every single time." I looked at the screen. A few of the emails had genuinely come to me, but the timestamps told their own story: 1 a.m., 3 a.m. For 30 a.m., Qin Chen had sent them all after I'd clocked out for the night, and if I hadn't replied within 10 minutes, he'd flagged them as urgent, no response. It was a low-level tactic, but effective enough on anyone who didn't know the full picture. Su Wanqing finished reading, her expression darkening. Xin Yan, do you have anything to say for yourself? Do you want an explanation? I asked. Or do you want the result? She frowned. What's that supposed to mean? I set a document on the table. This is my resignation handover checklist. Everything within my actual job responsibilities is organized and ready. Personal authorizations outside that scope aren't part of the handover. Qin Chen pounced immediately. See? He's admitting it. He's treating company resources like his personal bargaining chips. I looked up at him. Assistant Qin, you're wrong. I slid a second document forward. I'm not treating them as anything. That's just what they are. A low murmur moved through the room. Su Wanqing stared at the file but didn't open it. Some part of her seemed to already sense it wasn't going to contain what she wanted to see. Qin Chen, eager to look useful, reached for it. I pressed my hand down on it. You're not qualified to see this one. His hand froze in midair. A few executives nearby turned to look at him. His face went red, then white. Xin Yan, Su Wanqing said coldly. Don't push this too far. I lifted my hand and slid the file across to her instead. CEO Su can look at it. She opened it. The first page was the licensing agreement. The second was an appendix from Su Group's crisis restructuring years back. The third carried her father's handwritten signature. The further she read, the tighter her fingers gripped the pages. Qin Chen sensed something was wrong and leaned in. CEO Su. She snapped the folder shut. Get out. He froze. CEO Su. I said get out. His expression twisted, ugly for a second, before he forced it back into something like a smile with everyone watching. All right, I'll step out. At the door, he glanced back at me. Just once. There was real malice in it this time. Once the door clicked shut, Su Wanqing lowered her voice. Why didn't I know about this agreement? It has my signature on it. You signed it, I said. That's impossible. I flipped to the signature page. Her name was right there. 3 years ago, right after she'd taken over as CEO, overwhelmed and barely keeping her head above water, I'd handed her that document and told her it was Su Group's last safety net. She hadn't read it carefully. She'd only asked me one thing. Will you always help me? I said yes. So she signed. She'd remembered my yes. She'd forgotten everything the document actually said. That authorization could be revoked, that guarantees could be terminated, that none of this maintenance work was ever part of my actual job. The color drained from her face. So you had an exit plan from the very beginning. I shook my head. Not an exit plan. A boundary. She looked at me, then let out a cold, humorless laugh. Xin Yan, you're terrifying. 3 years married, and you were still guarding yourself against me. Su Wanqing, I said, looking back at her. 3 years married, and you still thought it was fine to let me be humiliated in public. Like it was nothing. Her smile froze. Just then, an argument erupted outside the door. It swung open and Qin Chen burst in, clutching another folder. President Su. I found the evidence. He slammed it onto the table. Xin Yan reached out to Nanjiao Group privately, deliberately getting them to suspend the signing. This isn't a normal resignation. This is sabotage. Su Wanqing's head snapped toward me. Triumph gleamed in Qin Chen's eyes. He genuinely thought he'd caught me red-handed. I picked up his so-called evidence. It was an email from Nanjiao's chief to me, 1 line long. Mr. Shun, if you're no longer providing performance guarantees for Su Corporation, we'll need to reassess the partnership. I set it back down. Qin Chen, do you even know who signed Nanjiao's original cooperation framework 3 years ago? He sneered. Of course, President Su did. I pulled up the original agreement on my phone and turned it toward him. The main signatory column didn't say Su Wanqing. It said Xin Yan. The smugness on his face cracked, piece by piece. I turned to Su Wanqing. Let him keep digging if he wants. The deeper he goes, the faster this ends for him. The Nanjiao meeting was set for Friday afternoon. Su Wanqing hadn't wanted me there at first, until Nanjiao replied with a single line. If Mr. Shun isn't present, the meeting is off. That sentence soured Qin Chen's mood for an entire day. He still took the main seat at the table, though. Not because he'd earned it, but because Su Wanqing wanted to leave him at least a scrap of dignity. Nanjiao sent 3 representatives. Leading them was Vice President Zhou Banyan. Here's the continuation in the same tone. The moment he walked in, Zhou Banyan bypassed Qin Chen entirely and came straight to me. Mr. Shin. Long time no see. I stood and shook his hand. Qin Chen, sitting in the main seat, forced a smile, but his fingers tightened around his pen. Su Wanqing caught the exchange, and her expression shifted, just slightly. Once Zhou Banyan sat down, Qin Chen wasted no time opening his proposal. President Zhou, for the East City project, I'll be your point of contact going forward. There were a few misunderstandings during our internal handover, but rest assured, I'll keep things moving smoothly. Zhou Banyan didn't respond to him. He simply opened the contract to the first page. Mr. Qin, I have a question. Go ahead. Who is Su Corporation's performance guarantor? Qin Chen hesitated. Su Corporation Group, of course. Zhou Banyan looked up. Specifically, who? Qin Chen frowned. President Zhou, does a group commitment really need to be pinned to one individual? Zhou Banyan slid the contract forward. Yes. 3 years ago, Nanjiao's partnership with Su Corporation was built on a supply chain risk control model, emergency fund guarantees, and a data tracking system, all provided personally by Mr. Shun. Whether he continues to honor those obligations determines whether we sign today. The smile on Qin Chen's face faltered. President Zhou, Shen Yan is just Su Corporation's deputy director. Zhou Banyan glanced at him. Mr. Qin, I think you're mistaken. He set an older contract on the table. In Nanjiao's records, Mr. Shun isn't listed as an employee representative. He's the Qingyao Systems licensor, the project's risk control lead, and the joint signatory on the performance guarantee. The room went quiet. Su Wanqing stared at the contract, her expression growing heavier by the second. Qin Chen tried to push back. That's just the old structure. President Su runs Su Corporation now, and I'm the project lead she appointed. Zhou Banyan nodded slowly. An appointed lead can be changed. He paused. A guarantor can't just be swapped out on a whim. I'd stayed silent through all of it until he turned to me. Mr. Shin, what's your position? I set the file in my hand down on the table. Effective today, I'm terminating my personal guarantee on Su Corporation's East City project. Qin Chen shot up from his chair. On what grounds? I looked at him. Because it's my name on the guarantee letter. Zhou Banyan immediately told his legal team to note it for the record. Su Wanqing finally spoke. Shen Yan, do you understand what terminating that guarantee means? Yes, the East City project stalls, financing costs go up, and Nanjiao may walk away. She kept her eyes on me. So you're just going to watch this company fall apart. I didn't look away. Su Corporation isn't falling apart because I'm pulling my guarantee. It's falling apart because you put someone in charge of this project who doesn't even understand how the contract is structured. Qin Chen went pale. Shen Yan, don't slander me. I opened a third document. This is 2 months of correspondence your assistant sent regarding the East City project. 7 core data errors. 3 unauthorized commitments. 1 instance of quietly altering a payment milestone. Zhou Banyan took the document, and the further he read, the darker his face grew. Qin Chen's hands started to shake. Those were all normal communications, he said. I was just trying to keep the project moving. Normal communications? I flipped to the last page. You promised Nanjiao an early release on the advance payment, without financial approval. You told our supplier the purchase price would rise, without a cost assessment. You even used my old signature stamp to issue a confirmation letter. Qin Chen spun toward Su Wanqing. President Su, he's framing me. Her lips pressed into a thin line. The look she gave me was so complicated I barely recognized it. I set a voice recorder on the table. This is audio the audit system automatically saved from yesterday when you asked admin to destroy the signature stamp usage logs. All the color drained out of his face. I pressed play. His own voice filled the room. Don't keep this stuff on file. Xin Yan and President Su are on the outs right now. If he starts digging, it'll be trouble. Just do what I'm telling you, and I'll square it with President Su later. When it ended, the only sound left in the room was the air conditioner. Zhou Banian closed the document. President Su, Nanjiao will need to reassess the risk of continuing this partnership with your company. Su Wanqing didn't answer. She was looking at Qin Chen, the first time genuine suspicion had crossed her face when looking at him. He panicked. President Su, believe me, Xin Yan is deliberately trying to drive a wedge between us. Here's the continuation in the same tone. He can't stand that you value me. Su Wanqing said nothing. I stood, straightening my cuffs. President Zhou, my position's clear. Zhou Banian nodded. Understood. I turned and walked away. At the door, Su Wanqing called out behind me. Shen Yan. I stopped. Her voice was low. How much more have you been hiding from me? I turned back to look at her. What you should be asking is how much you've missed these 3 years. She sat there at the table, and for the first time her expression shifted. Not anger. Hesitation. But it came too late to matter. For 2 days after that, Qin Chen kept an unusually low profile. He stopped hovering around me, stopped rushing to post project updates in the company group. But I knew he hadn't given up. He was just waiting for an opening to strike back. Su Wanqing, meanwhile, started texting me constantly. The first, can the North Bay interface be restored? I didn't answer. The second, is there any room to negotiate with Nanjiao? I replied, per the contract. The third came at 11 at night. Are you coming home? I stared at that one for a long time, then turned my phone off. Home used to mean something to me. Now it was just a door lock passcode. The next day, my father-in-law summoned me to the old Su family mansion. Su Wanqing was already there when I arrived, dressed in a black suit, makeup light. The slap mark long faded from her cheek, though the exhaustion in her eyes was impossible to hide. My father-in-law sat in the main chair, a cup of tea in front of him. Wanqing apologized to Yan. Her fingers curled tight. Dad, apologize. She bit her lip and looked at me. She still wasn't willing. Not because she didn't want to bow her head, but because she genuinely didn't understand why she had to. Xin Yan, she said. At the dinner that night, I didn't handle the boundaries well. I waited 2 seconds. No follow-up came. My father-in-law slammed his teacup down. Boundaries. Her face twisted. Then what do you want me to say? Qin Chen and I never had anything improper between us. He just drank too much that night. Everyone was just joking around. I looked at her. You still think that's the point? Whether anything actually happened between you two? She froze. Isn't it? I shook my head. No. The point is you knew he was stepping on me, and you let him keep doing it anyway. Her eyes trembled. My father-in-law closed his eyes. Wanqing, I said nothing when you moved him into the office next to the CEO's. I said nothing when you brought him onto the project. But you let him use what Yan built to humiliate Yan himself. That's not just being careless. That's forgetting where you came from. Those 2 words hit her harder than the slap had. She whispered, Dad, I admit I didn't handle it well, but Qin Chen genuinely has ability. In 6 months by my side, he's taken so much off my plate. I couldn't help but laugh. Her eyes snapped to me. What's so funny? What he took off your plate, I said, was the result of my work. Her gaze turned cold again. Xin Yan, can you stop bringing everything back to him? My father-in-law's temper flared. You're still defending him? Now? She pressed her lips shut. The room went cold and quiet. That's when his secretary walked in and handed over a folder. Chairman Su, audit just received some anonymous documents. regarding Qin Chen's expense reports and project sign-offs. Su Wanqing's head jerked up. The secretary glanced my way. I kept my expression blank. Of course, the documents weren't anonymous. I'd had them sent. But I didn't owe anyone an explanation for that. My father-in-law opened the folder, his face growing colder with every page. Over the past 3 months, Qin Chen submitted 12 reimbursements for luxury hotel suites, all logged as project reception. Su Wanqing's expression shifted. Which hotels? The secretary quietly read off a few names. 2 of them were places she'd personally stayed during business trips. Qin Chen had expensed the room right next door. My father-in-law kept turning pages. Also, 5 gift purchases. The recipient wasn't a client. It was his own mother. The color started draining from her fingers. He told me those were gifts for partners' wives. My father-in-law let out a cold laugh. Do partners' wives share his surname? No one said a word. I stood. Chairman Su. If there's nothing else, I'll take my leave. Su Wanqing shot to her feet. Shen Yan. I stopped. Her voice was tight. When did you start looking into all this? From the first time he used my old signature stamp. You knew. This whole time. Here's the continuation in the same tone. Yes. Anger flared in her eyes. Then why didn't you tell me? I looked at her. I did tell you. That caught her off guard. I told you Qin Chen wasn't fit for core projects. I said calm. You told me I was jealous of his youth and drive. She clearly remembered that line. The color drained from her face. I told you not to give him access to the CEO's office. You said I was too controlling. I told you he was taking credit and stirring up trouble in the team. You said I couldn't stand having newcomers around. With every sentence, she seemed to shrink back a step. Finally, I set a file on the table. This is the draft divorce agreement. The moment she saw those words, she snatched it up, glanced at it once, and tore it apart. The pieces fluttered to the floor. Her chest heaved. I don't agree to this. I looked down at the mess on the ground. Doesn't matter. The final version will be delivered to your company through my lawyer. I turned and walked out of the Su family mansion. Behind me, my father-in-law called out, tired. Ah Yen. I stopped, but didn't turn around. His voice was low. The Su family has wronged you. Dad. I said. This is the last time I'll call you that. In the living room, Su Wanqing's breathing had gone ragged. She finally understood. I wasn't trying to force an apology out of her. I was preparing to leave. Completely. That's when Su Group's problems started coming apart all at once. First, the North Bay financing stalled. Then Nanjiao suspended the East City project. Suppliers started demanding reconfirmation on payment guarantees. The final blow landed when the Overseas Fund sent an official letter demanding to know whether Shenyan would continue as joint risk guarantor. When Su Wanqing read that email, she sat frozen in her chair for a long time. It had been CC'd to the board. There was no burying it now. An emergency board meeting was called that afternoon. I didn't attend, but my father-in-law had his secretary send me the recording. The director's questions grew sharper with every sentence. President Su, why wasn't the board informed in advance about a change to the core guarantor? Isn't the Qingyao system a company asset? Then how do you explain the technical capability in 3 years of financial reports? Who promoted Qin Chen? How does an assistant end up with access to the Nanjiao contract and the financing interface? Su Wanqing kept her voice steady. I'll handle it. The directors weren't buying it. How? If Shenyan doesn't sign, North Bay's financing doesn't come through. Nanjiao's suspended. East City's land costs pile up every single day. Give us a real timeline, President Su. Qin Chen was in the room too, still fighting. Directors, Shenyan is being overly emotional right now. This company can't be held hostage by one man. I propose we form a new tech team immediately to replace the Qingyao system. A director asked, how long would that take? Qin Chen paused. Conservatively, 3 months. Another director scoffed. 3 months? East City can't hold out 3 weeks. The meeting dissolved into chaos. Finally, my father-in-law spoke. Start an internal audit. Now. Qin Chen's tone shifted fast. Chairman Su, the priority right now is fixing the project, not internal fighting. My father-in-law said only, "What are you so afraid of?" The recording ended there. I set my phone down and opened my laptop. The Qingyao Systems authorization dashboard was still up. Su Corporation status still read basic authorization active. I hadn't cut that off. Thousands of regular employees still needed their paychecks, and grassroots operations couldn't be allowed to collapse. What I'd revoked were only the value-added modules that had been quietly propped up by my own personal credit. At 7 that evening, Su Wanqing showed up at my temporary apartment. She stood at the door holding a folder. I opened it but didn't let her in. Her eyes were a little red. "Can you just sign this once? For the overseas fund?" "As what?" I asked. "Husband? Employee? Authorizer? Or the guy who still has to clean up the mess after your assistant humiliated me in public?" Her lips trembled. "Xin Yan, I know you've been wronged. You don't understand." I cut her off, staring at her. "What I understand is the company's in trouble. So here you are." That landed. Her face went pale. "I admit I've neglected you. I admit Qin Chen did things he shouldn't have. But Su Corporation can't fall apart right now. Help me one more time and we'll sort everything else out after." I glanced at the file in her hand. A temporary guarantee confirmation letter. If I signed it, the overseas fund would keep releasing money. Su Corporation could breathe a little longer. Qin Chen could survive a few more days. I didn't take it. "Su Wanqing, I've helped you too many times already. So many times you started assuming that as long as you turned around and said, 'We'll talk later,' I'd just keep doing it." Her eyes were fully red now. "Then what do you actually want?" "Boundaries." I handed her a different file. "This is the guarantee termination notice. It takes effect tomorrow at 9 a.m. She took it, hands shaking. "Do you really have to take it this far?" "Yes." "Aren't you afraid Su Corporation collapses?" "I used to be." I looked at her. 3 years ago, I was afraid when your father fell ill. I was afraid when the banks called in the loans. I was afraid the night you locked yourself in your office and cried alone." Her head snapped up. She clearly hadn't expected me to remember that. Of course I remembered. She'd shut herself in the CEO's office that night, crying quietly. I'd stood outside the door for 10 minutes before finally pushing it open and setting a restructuring plan on her desk. She'd grabbed my hand and said, "Xin Yan, I really can't hold on anymore." I told her, "I'll help you hold on." And I did. For 3 years. Long enough that she started believing it had always just been hers to begin with. I pulled myself back to the present. Now, I'm not afraid anymore. She stood in the doorway as if those words had knocked the strength out of her legs. "What about us?" she whispered. "My lawyer will be in touch." Tears slid down her face, but she didn't say anything else. As she turned to leave, her phone rang. It was Audit. From the sound of it, she listened for a few seconds and her face changed. "What did you just say? Qin Chen went to the archives room last night?" She looked up at me. I didn't react. Qin Chen had finally cracked under the pressure. And panic makes people careless. The surveillance footage showed him breaking into the archives at 1:47 a.m. Mask, baseball cap, in through the fire escape using a backup access card from admin. He'd assumed the card wouldn't leave a trail. He hadn't accounted for the fact that the Qingyao system logged the chip ID underneath, not just the name printed on the card. The next morning, Su Corporation was scheduled to launch the East City project. Qin Chen insisted on going ahead as planned. He told Su Wanqing, "There are already rumors we're in trouble. Canceling now just confirms them. Let me go up there and steady things." She didn't agree right away. She no longer trusted him unconditionally the way she used to, but she didn't have a better option either. And since I'd refused to attend, the launch went forward at 10 a.m. I sat in the backstage lounge watching the live feed. Qin Chen stood on stage in a deep blue suit, that same polished smile back in place. "To our media partners and guests, the East City project remains Su Group's core strategy for the next 3 years. As for the rumors about internal restructuring, I can tell you clearly, progress remains on track. Before the words had even settled, a representative from Nanjao Group raised a hand. Mr. Qin, is Qin Chen still serving as risk control lead on this project? The smile on his face froze. This project belongs to Su Group. It doesn't depend on any one individual. The representative pressed. Has the Qingyao licensing issue been resolved? The press perked up instantly. Qin Chen's jaw tightened. That's an internal matter. It won't affect the overall project. Right then, the big screen behind him flickered. The project promo cut out, replaced by a licensing status notice. Qingyao System, East City Project Value-Add Module Authorization. Terminated. The room erupted. Qin Chen spun around backstage. A technician stammered, "We didn't cut it. It's an automatic sync from the partner's side." I was standing at the backstage entrance, tablet in hand. Su Wanqing rushed over from the other side and stopped dead when she saw me. "You did this. The system just synced the real status," I said. The color drained from her face. On stage, Qin Chen was unraveling. "Everyone, please don't misunderstand. This is just a technical adjustment. It'll be back up shortly." The Nanjao representative rose to his feet. Here's the continuation in the same tone. "Mr. Qin, without proper authorization, we can't continue this partnership. We'll need a clear explanation from Su Group." Sweat beaded on Qin Chen's forehead. That's when the head of audit walked onto the stage, legal counsel in tow. Su Wanqing's expression shifted violently. "Who sent them up here?" "The board," I said. The audit chief handed Qin Chen a document in front of the entire room. "Mr. Qin Chen, regarding allegations of forged signatures, fraudulent expense claims, and unauthorized destruction of project records, you are hereby ordered to cease representing Su Group with immediate effect and cooperate fully with the internal investigation." Camera flashes exploded beneath the stage. Qin Chen stood frozen, like a statue. His first instinct wasn't to defend himself. It was to look for her. "President Su, say something." That shout dragged every eye in the room toward Su Wanqing. She stood at the edge of the backstage area, her face ash-white. Qin Chen's panic tipped into something shrill. "This wasn't just me. You told me to take over the project. You told me to bypass Qin Chen if he wouldn't cooperate. You told me to grab the permissions." The room erupted. Su Wanqing swayed on her feet. I reached out and gripped the doorframe beside me. Not her. Qin Chen had finally shown his real face. He'd never been loyal to her. He was just someone who called her President Su when the wind was at her back, and threw her to the wolves the moment it turned. Legal counsel spoke, cold and even. "Mr. Qin, watch your words. Everything you've done is already documented. Whether anyone else was involved will be investigated separately." As two security guards led him off stage, he kept shouting, "President Su, I did all of this for you. You can't just abandon me." Su Wanqing stood there, drained of all color. The press kept snapping photos like a swarm. The board members' faces had gone to stone. Her father stood off to the side, silent, watching the entire thing unfold. Finally she turned to him, her voice hoarse, asking a question that had come far, far too late. "Dad, who is Qin Chen? Really?" Her father looked at her for a long moment. "You want to know now?" Something in her eyes shattered, piece by piece. He turned and walked out, heading back toward the old family house. He didn't call for me, but I already knew. The truths buried 3 years ago were finally about to surface. The study in the old Su house was dim. Su Wanqing sat on the sofa, looking like every sharp edge she'd ever had been stripped away overnight. Her father opened the safe and pulled out an old craft paper envelope, a date written on the seal, 3 years back. He set it in front of her. "Read it." She opened it. A bank loan recall notice. A joint demand letter from suppliers. A cash flow projection for the company from that period. And last, a personal guarantee I'd signed, along with a no-fee licensing agreement for the Qingyao system. She flipped through page after page, her fingers growing stiffer with each one. Her father's voice was heavy. 3 years ago, Su Group was on the verge of bankruptcy. You think it was me who pulled it through? She said nothing. It wasn't me. He looked over at me. It was Yen. Her head snapped up. I sat at the desk, offering no explanation. Her father went on. He brought in the Qingyao system to rebuild the company's risk control from the ground up. He went to see Zhou Banian in Nanzhou himself and locked down our first supply chain deal. He used his own personal credit to keep our overseas funding stable. Her eyes reddened instantly. Why didn't anyone tell me? He let out a cold laugh. What good would that have done? You'd just taken over as CEO, and the whole board was waiting for you to fail. He asked me not to put his name on any of it, to let you find your footing first. She turned to look at me. For the first time, really looked. Panic flickered across her face. Not the panic of a company in crisis. The panic of realizing just how catastrophically wrong she'd been. Her father pulled out one more document. This is a supplementary agreement I signed with him before your wedding. She froze. She opened it. It stated that if, during the marriage, Su Wanqing seriously harmed Xinyan's interests, he retained the right to terminate every personal guarantee and authorization he held, and to pursue liability afterward. Her voice trembled. Dad, why would you sign this? Her father looked at her. 'Cause I know exactly who you are. You've always been proud. Here's the continuation in the same tone. Once you make up your mind, it's hard for you to turn back. I was afraid one day you'd mistake his patience for weakness, and his sacrifices for something you were simply owed. Her tears fell onto the page. Her father's voice grew heavier. In the end, I still couldn't stop it. She covered her face with both hands. The study sat in silence for a long time. Finally she whispered, "So that night at the hotel, when you hit me, it was because of this?" Her father stared at her. "I hit you because you let an outsider trample the man who saved this family, in front of everyone." Her shoulders trembled. "You thought Qin Chen was just holding you, humiliating Yen," he went on. "You were wrong. He was holding the CEO of Su Corp, humiliating the entire Su family's name. And the stupidest part is you defended him for it." That's when she finally broke down sobbing. She looked at me, her voice cracking. "Xinyan, I didn't know." "You did?" I cut in. She froze. I looked at her. "You knew Qin Chen was crossing a line. You knew he was provoking me. You knew it made me uncomfortable. You just didn't think it mattered." Her mouth opened. Nothing came out. I set the last document on the table. "This is the official divorce agreement." Her face went pale. "Xinyan, along with the authorization termination notice, the guarantee release letter, and the Nanzhou Cooperation Resignation Declaration." I looked at her. "I'll submit all of it at tomorrow's board meeting." She shot to her feet. "Do you have to be this ruthless?" I stood too. "Su Wanqing, this only feels ruthless to you because I'm finally sticking to the contract. For 3 years I treated you with feeling, and you managed me like an asset. Now I'm treating you by the rules, and you want me to bring feeling back into it?" The tears froze on her face. Her father closed his eyes and said nothing more. He already knew there was no point. I picked up my coat, ready to go. She grabbed my sleeve from behind, her voice barely audible. "If I had pushed him away that day, if I had stood up for you right there, would it have come to this?" I didn't turn around. "There are no ifs." Her grip loosened, and I walked out of the study. I heard her call my name behind me. I didn't stop. Some people never realize they're hurting someone. They just assume you'll stay even after the pain. Not this time. On the day of the board meeting, Su Wanqing sat at the head of the table, though everyone in the room understood she was no longer secure in that seat. Before the meeting even started, word had already spread through the company. Qin Chen had been taken in by police for questioning. Nobody called him President Qin anymore. Nobody talked about his youth and drive. The people who'd once toasted him were quietly deleting old group photos from their feeds. When I walked into the room, she looked up at me. Her eyes were visibly red, the divorce agreement sitting beside her hand. Her father sat in the chairman's seat, looking utterly worn down. The legal director spoke first. Per the internal audit, during his tenure Qin Chen engaged in unauthorized reimbursements, improper use of the signature stamp, unauthorized payment commitments, and suspected destruction of project records. Evidence has been submitted to the board. Then the audit head reported the losses. The numbers were even worse than the last update. Su Wanqing didn't argue with any of it. When it was my turn, I opened my file. First, basic authorization for the Qingyao system stays active for 3 months, so the transition doesn't disrupt grassroots operations. Someone in the room let out a quiet breath of relief. Second, authorization for the East City project's value-add module is terminated. The room tensed back up. Third, my personal guarantee on the North Bay financing is officially released. The finance director's face changed color. Mr. Shen, without that guarantee, financing costs rise at least 2 percentage points. I nodded. I know. He looked ready to argue further, but my father-in-law raised a hand and cut him off. I turned to the last page. Fourth, the Nanjiao cooperation framework will be taken over by a new company under my name. Su family can bid for supplier contracts like anyone else, but exclusive rights end here. The room erupted the second the words left my mouth. Su Wanqing's head snapped toward me. A new company? When did this happen? Here's the continuation in the same tone. The day you let Qin Chen take over the East City project. Her expression looked like she'd been stabbed. Not because of the new company, because she finally understood I'd already decided to leave all the way back then. My father-in-law sat silent for a moment, then said simply, "Board vote." The result surprised no one. Su Wanqing was suspended from her position as president and transferred to the group strategic committee pending further investigation. My father-in-law resumed the role of interim president. After the meeting broke up, she chased me into the hallway. "Xin Yan, let's talk." I stopped. She held out the divorce agreement. "I'll sign it." I looked at her. "What's the condition?" Her eyes were red. "Can you not take Nanjiao away?" I smiled. The color drained from her face instantly. Maybe she realized, even as she said it, how it sounded. In the end, her first instinct was still the company. I took the agreement from her. "Su Wanqing, I didn't take Nanjiao anywhere. They just stopped believing in you." Her lips trembled. "What about us? Do you not believe in me either, anymore?" I looked at her, and after a long silence said, "I stopped believing a long time ago." That landed harder than anything I could have argued. She stood frozen in the hallway, like someone had hit pause on her. At 3 that afternoon, we went to the Civil Affairs Bureau. She stayed quiet the whole ride over. When we sat down to file the paperwork, the clerk asked, routine as ever, "Is this mutual and voluntary?" "Voluntary," I said. Su Wanqing held the pen, hesitating. The clerk glanced at her again. She looked up at me, her voice barely above a whisper. "Xin Yan, if I said I regret this now, is it too late?" I didn't look at her tears. "It's not too late for the paperwork." Something lit up in her eyes. "But it's too late for the feelings." The light went out. She lowered her head and signed. The pen tip caught slightly against the paper as she wrote her name. Certificate in hand, she stood at the door, not moving. "Will you ever think of me after this?" I tucked the certificate into my bag. "Yes." She looked up, something almost hopeful crossing her face. "To remind myself," I said, "not to give what I have to the wrong person again." All the color left her face. I didn't stay to watch it. Walking out of the Civil Affairs Bureau, the sun was bright overhead. My phone buzzed. A message from Zhou Banian. "Mr. Shen, the paperwork for the new company is ready." I replied with 2 words. "Let's begin." From that moment, Xin Yan was no longer the man standing behind Su Wanqing. I was just myself. On opening day for the new company, representatives from Nanjiao, the overseas fund, and several longtime suppliers all showed up. No red carpet, no elaborate ceremony. Just a simple sign going up. Qingyao Technology. Zhou Banian stood below the stage, smiling at me. "President Shen, this time you finally don't have to hide behind someone else." I was never hiding, I said. He nodded. You were yielding. I didn't answer that one. He wasn't wrong. 4 years. I'd let Su Wanqing stand in the spotlight. Let the Su family keep their dignity. Let my father-in-law recover in peace. Let the marriage look less pathetic than it actually was. But nobody can yield forever. Yield long enough and people start believing you have no other option. The signing ceremony went smoothly. Qin Technology formally took over the risk control system for Nanjiao's East City project and struck a fresh round of cooperation with the Overseas Fund. Su Corporation's stock dipped briefly when the news broke, but my father-in-law stepped back in fast enough to keep it from crashing outright. That was the last bit of dignity I left behind, not for Su Wanqing. For him, Qin Chen's case wrapped up a month later. Forged signatures, fraudulent reimbursements, destruction of records, embezzlement of company assets. The evidence chain was airtight on every charge. His mother quietly returned the so-called client gifts. He was formally prosecuted. I heard he even tried writing letters to Su Wanqing from inside, insisting it had all been her fault. She never went to see him. She's no longer president of Su Corporation. She was moved to a minor department sorting through old project archives. Her office went from the top floor to the 12th. Her permissions were stripped. Her assistant was replaced by someone the group assigned. Most of the people who used to crowd around her had already drifted away. Here's the final section, rewritten in the same tone. The last time I saw her was downstairs at Qingyao Tower. She stood by the roadside in a plain trench coat, a paper bag in her hand. When she saw me walk out, she took 2 steps forward, then stopped. I'm not here to beg for a reconciliation, she said first. I nodded. Yeah. She gave a bitter smile. You won't even bother asking why anymore, will you? I didn't say anything. She held out the paper bag. Inside was the ring and an old notebook. That notebook was the crisis plan I wrote for Su Corporation 3 years ago. Her voice was quiet. I found it while sorting through old projects. So back then, you really were only sleeping 3 hours a night. I looked at the bag but didn't take it. Her eyes reddened. Xin Yan. I really didn't know back then. Now you do, I said. So remember it well. Her fingers trembled. Remember what? That not every retreat comes from weakness. And not every silence means someone couldn't leave. Tears slid down her face. The wind picked at the loose strands of hair by her forehead. She used to be so proud. Proud enough to believe the world would arrange itself around her. Now finally she'd learned how to bow her head. Turns out I don't need it anymore though, she said softly. My dad told me what I lost wasn't a husband. I looked at her. He said what I lost was the sturdiest pillar this company ever had. I shook my head. He's wrong. She froze. What you lost, I said, was a man who genuinely wanted to build a life with you. That's when she completely broke down. But inside I felt calm. No satisfaction. No regret. Just the quiet sense that a 3-year-long story had finally run its course. I still didn't take the bag. Deal with the ring yourself, I said. You really have nothing left, she choked out. No attachment at all. I glanced toward the entrance of Qin Technology, where someone was already waiting for me. A meeting, a new project, a new team, a new life. No attachment left. I turned and walked inside. Behind me, she didn't call my name again. I heard from my father-in-law later that she'd changed a lot. She started reviewing contracts herself, running projects herself, apologizing to frontline staff herself. She'd finally understood that a company isn't held up by a few polished press conferences, and that loyalty isn't something you earn by indulging people. But none of that had anything to do with me anymore. 6 months later, Qin Technology closed its second funding round. The Nanjiao project launched ahead of schedule. The Overseas Fund doubled down with more investment. Someone asked me in an interview, Mr. Shan, why did you really leave Su Corporation? I thought about it for a moment, then said the only thing that mattered. Because I didn't want to be a card nobody ever saw again. Off camera, Zhou Banian clapped, smiling. I smiled too. That night, I happened to pass by Yunting Hotel. The lights out front were still bright. I remembered that dinner, Qin Chen's arm around her waist, showing her off table by table. Remembered taking the photo, sending it to the family group. Remembered 10 minutes later, my father-in-law storming through those doors, asking her one question. Do you know who you've pissed off? Back then, neither of them had a clue. They both figured I was just a jealous husband, sulking after being iced out. But real payback was never about making a scene. It's quietly pulling your hand out from under the table and letting everyone realize all at once that the whole thing had been resting on you the entire time.